All right, let's talk about Approved Document M, Volume 2. Now, this isn't just some dry technical manual. Think of it as the ultimate blueprint for making sure commercial and public buildings in England are actually open to everyone. And look, if you're someone who designs, builds, or even just manages these kinds of spaces, getting this stuff right, well, it's absolutely non-negotiable.
So you might think that's a simple question, right? But the answer? It's a lot more complicated than it looks. You see, this isn't just about having good intentions. We're talking about hard and fast legal standards you have to meet. So in this breakdown, we're going to walk you through all the key technical bits and pieces that'll make sure your projects are genuinely inclusive right from day one.
So, here's the plan. We'll kick off with the legal basics. Then we'll look at approaching the building, how you get in and move around, the special facilities inside, and finally, we'll touch on what all this means for existing buildings. Let's dive in.
All right, first things first, the foundation of access. Look, before we even think about a single measurement or ramp gradient, we've got to get our heads around the core legal duty. This one principle, it's the bedrock for every single design decision you'll make from here on out.
And here it is, Requirement M1. It's basically the golden rule. It says that reasonable provision must be made for people to gain access to and use the building and its facilities. And that means every choice. I mean, from the layout of the car park right down to the height of a light switch. It all has to meet this fundamental need for reasonable access. It's about making sure everyone can use the space.
Now here's something that's absolutely crucial to understand, a real key distinction. Just because you've ticked all the boxes for Approved Document M, that doesn't mean you're totally in the clear. See, it doesn't give you a free pass on your duties under the Equality Act 2010. That act is much broader. It's an ongoing thing, and what a court decides is a reasonable adjustment could easily be more demanding than the minimum standards in Part M. So it's a big one to remember.
Okay, let's start the journey. We're going to put ourselves in the user's shoes, starting right from the edge of the property. We're talking about that very first interaction, just getting to the building itself.
So, the gold standard here is what's called a level approach. What does that mean? Well, it's pretty simple. Keep your pads as flat as you possibly can. We're talking a gradient no steeper than 1 in 60. Following this one rule basically ensures that the journey from the street or the car park isn't a literal uphill struggle before you've even made it to the front door.
But hey, sometimes a perfectly level approach just isn't going to happen, right? That's where ramps come in. And there's a really important trade-off you need to know. The longer the ramp, what the regs call the going, the less steep it can be. So for a short 2-meter ramp, you can get away with a steeper 1 in 12 gradient. But if you need a longer 10-meter ramp, nope, you've got to flatten that out to a much gentler 1 in 20. It's a simple rule. Longer ramp, gentler slope.
You know, there's this common myth that ramps are always the best solution. But actually, for a lot of people who can walk but have mobility challenges, a really well-designed set of stairs can be much easier to use. The key, though, is getting the details spot on. We're talking about things like contrasting strips on the edge of each step so you can see them clearly, making sure the step sizes are consistent, and absolutely no open gaps between steps where someone could catch their foot. And of course, you've got to have continuous handrails on both sides for that crucial support.
1,200 millimeters, remember that number. It is the absolute non-negotiable minimum width for the accessibility zone right next to a disabled parking bay. And let's be clear, this isn't just some nice-to-have extra space. This is the vital zone that lets someone open their car door all the way, safely transfer into a wheelchair, and start making their way to the entrance with dignity. It's that important. Okay, so we've made it across the car park, and we're at the front door. Our journey now takes us inside. This bit is all about getting in and getting around, especially moving up and down between floors.
15 millimeters. That's it. Sounds tiny, doesn't it? But that is the absolute maximum height for a door threshold to be considered accessible. Anything higher than that, and it instantly becomes a massive barrier for a wheelchair user or a really nasty trip hazard for anyone with limited mobility. The dream is always a completely flush, level entrance, but if you have to have a threshold, 15 millimeters is the hard limit.
When it comes to door widths, it's not a one-size-fits-all situation. It totally depends on where the door is and how you're approaching it. For a main entrance door, you need a nice wide 1,000 millimeters of clear space. But check this out. For internal doors, if you're coming at it from the side, say turning from a corridor, you actually need it to be a bit wider, 825 millimeters. Why? It's all about giving enough room to make that turn without a struggle. It's just common sense when you think about it.
Let's talk about getting between floors. In a new building, the guidance is crystal clear. A passenger lift is what's expected, period. Things like platform lifts, they're really only a last resort. Usually for existing buildings where putting in a proper passenger lift is just not physically possible. For any new development, you start with the assumption it needs a lift. And it can't just be any old lift. It has to be a specific size inside. We're talking a minimum of 1,100 millimeters wide by 1,400 millimeters deep. And these numbers aren't just pulled out of thin air. That's the exact space needed for a wheelchair user to get in, turn around comfortably, and still have room for a friend or a companion to be in there with them. All right, we're in. We can move between floors. Now let's get into the nitty-gritty of the facilities inside the building. We're going to cover everything from seating in places like theaters right through to the super important topic of accessible toilets.
Think about places like cinemas, theaters, or even big university lecture halls. You have to provide dedicated wheelchair spaces. The basic rule is at least 1% of the total number of seats. But, and this is so important, you can't just stick them all in one corner at the back. The whole point is to offer a real choice of locations, so people have a genuine choice of where they want to sit and what kind of view they get.
Okay, let's talk about something that's had a massive and really critical update recently: changing places toilets. Now, these are not just standard accessible toilets with a bit more space. No, these are highly specialized facilities designed for people with profound and multiple disabilities who simply cannot use a standard accessible loo. And here is the absolute headline. Since 2020, this isn't just best practice anymore. It is a mandatory legal requirement for certain types of large, new public buildings. This change was a total game changer for accessibility here in the UK. Make no mistake.
So what kind of buildings have to have one? Well, here's the checklist. If you're working on a new assembly building, like a concert hall for more than 350 people, or a massive shopping center, a big retail store, or a hospital, you are now legally on the hook to include a fully kitted out changing places toilet in your design.
Here's another rule that people get wrong all the time. A wheelchair-accessible unisex toilet. You can't just have one tucked away in a remote corner of the building. The rule is super clear. Any place you have a set of male and female toilets, you must also provide a separate, accessible unisex toilet right there alongside them. No exceptions. So we've talked a lot about new builds, I know, but you're probably wondering, what about all the existing buildings out there? Well, this last section is all about that, how these rules apply when you're altering or changing the use of an older building.
And this is a really big one for anyone working on older properties. The phrase to remember is material change of use. That's the trigger. So if you're taking an old office building and turning it into, say, a hotel or a restaurant or an art gallery, you can't just get away with the old access arrangements. The law says you have to do the work to upgrade the building to bring it in line with today's standards for requirement M1.
So you see, from that tiny 15mm threshold to the 1,200mm parking zone, these aren't just numbers in a rulebook. They're literally the dimensions that define dignity and independence for millions of people. Getting them right isn't just important, it's essential. For more videos that dive really deep into the technical side of building regs, make sure you visit the Building Regulations Copilot YouTube channel. And if you've got specific questions about one of your own projects, the place to go is buildingregulationscopilot.com.